So hi guys, so in today's tutorial we're going to see how the map function in JavaScript works. We're going to see why we might need to use this map function or whether you should just stick to the old fashioned for loop. So we're going to start with the challenge, and the challenge here is to you're given an array. We say that an array in JavaScript is basically a collection of items, and these items have to be valid JavaScript data types. So for instance, you can see my data type right now is an array of numbers. So you could have an array of strings, you can have an array of a mixture array which has strings and defined. It has to carry a valid JavaScript data type. This is just a list, a collection, or a container that holds some items. So our challenge is to square the following items in this array. So if you're given such a challenge, how would you go about it? So first of all, what we could do is that we could use the for loop. So we are going to use the for loop and see where the for loop flops. So let's start. So with this one, we can just maybe create uh, an output array. So you can say output array or maybe modified, which you initialize to an empty array. And then you loop over the array. So you can say for let I is equals to 0. We talked about the for loops. So I hope you were working during that lesson. So for let I is equals to 0, whenever I is less than our array dot length, then I plus plus. Remember we said that the for loop loops over a range. So right now we are capping the range from the using the indices of this array. So we are starting from 0 and then we are going all the way until we are almost at array dot length, which means we always get the indices of the items in the array. So here the for loop is used to loop over a range, but now the range we are giving it corresponds to the indices of this array. So to get, let's console.log, let's call our array and try to get the item at that specific index. So you can see we got the actual item. So we got 2589. So, but our challenge is to make sure we get such an output whereby the elements inside this array are squared. So what I can do is that we can now push a new element to the modified array. So there's a way we can push items to an array by using the push method. And then the push method just receives the new array, the new element you want to push. So the new element you want to push is that we call our array and then we grab that item. So by doing array of that specific index, we get a specific item and then we can multiply it by itself. So we can just do like this. So this one is just illustrating a squaring effect. So make sure you remember that whenever we loop, we are looping through a range, and the range happens to have the indices of this array. By using this syntax, array of, it is like saying array of this index. But remember now we have, like for instance, we have index 0, array of index 0 gives us 2. So if we do this and multiply it by itself, then we can get the square. But we could also use the math module. So we can say math dot I think we can use math dot, but let's first use the old fashioned way. So as we said that we call our modified array. This one is empty, but now we are pushing something new. Something new we are pushing is array of that specific index. So assuming it's the first iteration, we are going to get 2. So it's 2 times 2, which gives us 4, which is an illusion of square. And then as soon as it does that, then we can console.log modified array. Okay, we got our answer. So you can see how many lines of code this one took us. And also it is very verbose. You can see it, whereby we have some repeating syntax whereby we initialize some new array with an empty array. We initialize a new variable with an empty array, and then we loop over using the for loop. We push some new elements. All this syntax is very repetitive and it is seen over and over again. And this is why we need to use the map function. So the map function is essentially an array method. And this array method, as we saw yesterday that we about the for each loop, now this array method returns something back to us. So let me give you the syntax. But before then, let me show you how the difference between the two. So I'm going to comment out that, and then you're going to say let modified array is equals to. So now I'm creating a new variable that will be assigned the result of our map function. So we call our we use our array and then we call the map method. So the map method receives some key items, but I'll show you about the syntax later. So let me first show you how easy it is. So we can say for each, give us the item, and for each item return item times item, and then console.log modified array. So we got the same result, but look at how clean this is. Can you say clean or neat? So let me break this into a new line so you can see how. I hope you can see how this is very neat. This is a one-liner code instead of doing over 3 lines of code. So this is what the map function is coming to solve. So without further ado, let's now see about the syntax of the map function. But we'll still use the array itself. So the map function, as we said, it's a higher order function. You can say, so it's a high order function. So by a high order function, we say that a high order function is a function that receives another function inside it. Okay. So the map function, since it receives a function inside it as an argument, then it's a high order function. And also this function, the function that is passed to the map function. So let's see. So array.map. So array.map is a method which receives a function as an argument. The first argument of the map function is a function. So we can also use function. So this function, we can create it here. So you can say function fn, and let's return. So it receives an item and it returns item times item. Don't worry too much about the syntax. So you have just to understand how the map function works. Then from there, you can build up on that. So we say that the map function receives a function as an argument. That means it is a high order function because it receives, this is a function that is being passed inside the map function. And to use the map function, we said you call your array and then you call the map function from the array and then pass it a function. So you can see I extracted that function outside and then passed the reference to that function. You could also do this. You could also create this function here. We have so many ways of creating functions in JavaScript. That's why you can see the different syntax. So you can say function fn, then it receives an item, then return item times item. So this is still the same thing. So this is still the same thing. You are still passing a function. But this function, remember, this function is not called. The map function is going to call this function itself. This function is not yet called. So this one is exactly equals to the version we had here. This is exactly equal. It's just like copying these and pasting it inside. Something else to note that the callback function. So this function that is passed to the map function is also called a callback function. And this callback function, there's something very key you need to note. This function has to return something because whatever this function returns becomes the new item. So remember, if let's go through the first iteration. The first iteration, we are going to call the callback function with the element 2. So this element 2, whatever this function now returns after being given the 2 is what will be the new value. So you have to always remember that this callback function has to return something, because this thing that it is returning is what will be the new element. Okay. So as we say that it is commonly used to transform or modify an existing array. Basically, it does some action on the existing elements and then produces some new elements. So this call will return a new array, and this array you can now save it inside a variable. So you can say const new array is equals to like that. So you can pass it, you can call it, and this one returns an array with the modified data. Then this data now you can assign it to a variable. Okay. So whatever the function returns becomes the new element, and the map. Finally, the map function does not execute on empty element. So if this one was empty, this one would not execute. So what else does the map function receive? So the map function receives two arguments. The first argument is this function that we are calling a callback function. The next argument, so some of these arguments you don't need to care about them, but it's good to know they are there. The next argument is called the this value. So just to note that this value is there and it has its own use case. If you pass this value here, it will be used as the this in the callback function. So I know this one might be not applicable. Don't focus on that argument. It's not commonly used. I've not even used it in my career. So don't care about it. Just know that it receives two arguments, but this is the required argument, the callback function. So let's go to the callback function now. What does the callback function get? What does it receive? So this callback function as well, it receives three arguments. So the first argument it receives is the item itself. So the item meaning the item that is currently being acted upon. So it receives the current item, and then it also receives the index of that item. So the item here is mandatory. This is what is required. The index is optional. You can use it. If you don't need it, you don't need to use it. And then finally it receives the array that this element is from. But now this also is not commonly used. So we are not going to focus on this final argument. We're just going to focus on these two. So just note that the map function receives two arguments, one of which is required, and it is the most argument that you are going to use. And then, so you can just now assume that it receives one argument, just to make sure you understand. But remember back in your mind that it receives two arguments. Don't focus on the other argument. So it receives callback function. The callback function also receives three arguments. We are just going to focus on two, the item and the index. Okay. So let's try some new examples so that you can understand. So now instead of squaring, then you can say add 5. So the map function is commonly used to modify. Okay. Used to modify some arrays. So now if you want to add 5, the answer now will be 7, 10, and then 13, and then 14. So to use the array map function, so we say that you call our array we want to act on, then call the map method. From it, we say that the map function now, or the map, so the map method will receive callback function. We can call it fn. You can create this function outside. You can say function fn. We said it receives three arguments. We are just going to focus on two. So we are saying that it receives the current item. You can call it any way you want. You can call it a num or an item. And also receives an index. We are not going to focus on the third argument, but just note the third argument is the array itself. And then it should return the item. Now here's where you write your logic to make sure you fulfill the given question. So it's the item plus 5. But right now, remember, we are not using the index. There are some scenarios like when working with long list in some frameworks or libraries called, like a library called React. This one comes in handy whereby you need a unique identifier for each item. If you don't have, you always tap into the index and grab it. So you're not going to use the index. And then let's store this inside a variable, and you can say modified array, and then you can console.log. Okay, right array. Now you can see get 7, 10, 13, and 14. So this is how it works. We can shorten this. We can shorten this map function. Instead of now extracting the function outside, we can cut this function and paste it inside as an argument. So this one will still, so this one still works. We just took the function from outside declaration and we pasted in. But we can also tighten this further, whereby we can now use an anonymous function. So anonymous function takes this scenario. Now let me show you the syntax of the anonymous function. Then we can extract it inside. So we can say fn. So then here you can create an anonymous function called fn. So we can say const fn is equals to a function return, which receives an item. Then it returns item times item. So this one is called an anonymous function. No, an arrow function. So for it to be anonymous, you don't need to give it a name. Like this one is named. You can see we are calling it a function. So this one is still the same as we had, but now it has a different syntax. So an anonymous, the arrow function, we can also tighten this up, whereby the arrow function says if you only have one task that it is handling, or you are just having to return a one liner, you're not doing some multiple calculations, you can omit the return. And then instead of using the curly brackets, you can remove the curly brackets. So remember, when you use the curly brackets, you are forced to use the return. But if you don't, it will do something called implicitly. It will just return. Okay. So const function is equals to item. Okay, so we faced some issue because of something called hoisting. So if you know what hoisting is, let me know in the comments. Okay, so we still get the same result. So remember that this is called an arrow function, and this one is still a function. But remember what I've said is that if you want, you're only doing one thing, like this one, you're just doing item times item, you can return it immediately by omitting the curly brackets, and then it will just return. So we can go a step further. Instead of creating a function and having a reference to it, we can paste this function right there. So you can paste the function right there, and now this one becomes, so we can paste the function there, and then this one becomes, so we don't want items times item, we want item plus 5. Okay, so this is how the map function works. You can see now we tighten things up, and then we are left with a map function that has an arrow function inside it. So yeah, so that's it, guys. You can see how it is easier. But now when working with maybe multiple logic, you can't use this because this one requires a one liner. So in that case, you just return the curly brackets. But now when you return the curly brackets, you have to return. So and then that still works. So that's it, guys. That's all about the map function. And yeah, mainly it is used to modify arrays. So thank you for watching and see you next.